Welcome to a new Draw My Life video.
Kuchisake-onna is a famous Japanese legend about a woman who, after being killed, comes back as a yokai, or an evil spirit, to take revenge. The story goes, a long time ago, there was a woman who was as beautiful as big-headed. She was so beautiful that she was courted by many men. Out of all her suitors, she decided to marry an important samurai. But the rest of the suitors didn't give up. At first, she wouldn't pay attention to them, but her husband had to go to war and she soon started feeling very lonely. In the end, she fell for the charms of one of the suitors. Her husband had been away for too long and she was the prettiest woman in town. Tired of waiting for him, she decided she could do as she wanted. So she kept on with her relationships with the different suitors, who were richer, more powerful, and stronger each time. But as we all know, rumors fly, and the samurai ended up hearing a story about a beautiful woman who would only accept the strongest men that went after her. When he heard this story, the samurai, a very proud man, felt really curious about the girl, even though he was married. One day, the samurai went back home and he went out for some drinks with his friends to celebrate his comeback. The party went on till late at night when one of his friends told him, "Do you remember the woman I told you about? She lives nearby." And the samurai, self-confident, decided to go and court the pretty lady. The closer he got to the place, the more familiar it seemed, but he was under the influence of alcohol. Suddenly, they stopped opposite a nice red door and his friend said, "It's here." But the samurai was speechless. He didn't say a word and the friend teased him. "What now? Are you gonna buck up?" The samurai, very serious now, answered, This is my house." He then went in, kicking the door, ran to his bedroom and found his wife with another man. The woman's face turned white after seeing that. All of a sudden, her husband had taken a sword through the man, and as he was taking it out of his back, the samurai asked her, "Do you think you're beautiful?" Then he held her strongly, put the sword in her mouth, and full of jealousy, cut her mouth, while the lady wouldn't stop screaming. People say the woman turned into an evil spirit, the Kuchisake-onna, who came back to the world thirsty for revenge. She looks like a completely normal woman and she hides her wounds by wearing a mask, something really common in Japan. Lots of people wear it to protect themselves from different diseases. Kuchisake-onna wanders around the streets looking for victims, especially during dark and gloomy nights. She approaches them and says, "Am I beautiful?" If you're carried along by her beauty and you answer yes, she will slowly take her mask off, letting you see her horrible scars, and then she will ask again, "And now, am I beautiful?" If the victim gets scared, screams, or says no, the woman will cut their mouth using some big scissors, imitating her scars. The victim will bleed to death. The wounds caused by Kuchisake-onna can never be healed. Others say if you answer yes to both questions, but showing you are afraid, the evil spirit will go with you to the door of your house and will stab you to death there. However, if you answer yes twice, calmly and without fear, the woman will give you a blood-stained rupee and then leave. Though they all agree on this, Kuchisake-onna will leave you alone if when she asks you for the first time, you say that you don't have time. She will apologize and you will continue your way. The Japanese legend of Kuchisake-onna is said to have very old origins, but it came back to light in 1996 with the movie Gakkoi no Kaidan. Since then, it was present in several Japanese movies. Though we should highlight Carved and its sequels, she also appeared in TV shows like American Horror Story, Freak Show, and Constantine. And remember, if a woman with a mask asks you in the street if she's beautiful, say you don't have time and don't look back.
A chilling legend circulates among the Japanese that speaks of a female spirit with the lower half of her body missing. They say that she crawls with hands that end in long fingers, with claws capable of cutting meat as if it were butter. She moves with its claws, making a very unpleasant noise, from which she receives her name, Teke Teke. Legend has it that Teke Teke is the ghost of a very introverted young woman who is the target of several teasings, both in high school and outside of it. But the day came when one of the jokes ended worse than expected. Taking advantage of the fact that it was cicada season, some bastards had prepared a joke. Placed one of those bugs on her to laugh at her while she tried to take it off. As a group, they followed her carefully, making sure not to be seen. The girl arrived at a small train station. It was late and there was hardly anyone there. It was the perfect time to proceed. One of them sidled up to her and carefully placed the cicada on her shoulder. When she felt something move next to her and saw the bug, she jumped and shook herself trying to get it off her, but slipped and fell onto the tracks. The assailants were too distracted laughing to notice that the train was about to arrive. Before anyone knew it, wham, the train crossed the station at full speed. At that moment, they heard a scream that silenced them. Frightened, they approached the tracks, and there was the dismembered body of the young woman who no longer screamed, no longer moved. Only hate and pain could be glimpsed on her face. The students went home and swore not to tell anything about what happened. She was a very strange girl, a depressive. Everyone will believe that she got tired of living and threw herself in front of the train, they thought. And so it was. Everyone thought that the poor girl had killed herself. One night when the boys were laughing at what had happened while they were going back home, they began to hear strange noises in the nearby streets. Little by little, they stopped laughing and became scared. With each corner they crossed, the sound grew louder, until one of them started running. He thought he had escaped. He looked back to make sure he was safe. But when he looked back, his companions heard him from afar. It was then that they began to run without stopping. As they crossed the last street, there was the dead girl without her legs staring back at them. They wanted to run away, but they were paralyzed by terror. They couldn't believe their eyes. So the spirit took out a sharp little scythe and killed them by splitting them in half. Since then, the Teke Teke wanders through the lonely stations in search of more victims in order to calm her anger. But you don't trust. There are stories that also place the Teke Teke in other places, besides near the tracks. The story of a young man who left school very late one night has come to our ears. He was on the street when he realized that he had forgotten his house keys in the building. When he turned to go back, one of the windows still had light. The boy could glimpse in at a beautiful girl who was looking at him. He was fascinated, and then the girl jumped out of the window, launching herself into the air towards him. What seemed beautiful before now seemed horrendous. The girl was no longer beautiful at all. Her face was emaciated, and half her body was missing. He could see how she was still bleeding. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't. He wanted to move, but he couldn't. He was completely petrified with terror. He already knew that she was the Teke Teke. The spirit was already upon him, and in a matter of seconds it ripped him in half with its own claws. The next morning, his companions found brutally skewered legs, but the upper part of the trunk never appeared. There's a very similar entity that is usually related to the Teke Teke, the spirit Kashima Reiko, which belongs to a girl who was brutally abused in a Hokkaido train station toilet. The assailants abandoned her, leaving her for dead, but she was not. Kashima crawled for help, but there was no one left to help her. Then she fell onto the train tracks. The tracks began to vibrate. The train was close. Before she could scream, the railway sped by, skewering her legs. This didn't kill her instantly. She spent a lot of time begging for help, but no one showed up. Finally, she bled to death. Now she haunts train station toilets, especially on the darkest of nights. She knocks on doors and asks the occupant, "Where are my legs?" And the victim has to answer, on the Meishin Expressway. If you answer anything else or are too hesitant to answer her, Kashima won't hesitate to walk through the door and brutally rips the legs off whoever's inside. The legend of Teke Teke, although relatively recent, has marked the Japanese population and already has 2 film adaptations in 2009. Train stations are a common place of passage in any city in the world, so remember, be very careful in them, especially if it's night and they're almost empty. And if someone knocks on your bathroom door, prepare yourself for the worst.
Japanese legends are back to Scary Tuesdays here on Draw the Life TikTak. It's been a while since we shared a scary Japanese legend with you. Today we'll talk about Hachishakusama, a terrible and horrifying Japanese spirit with the shape of a woman who kidnaps children. This Japanese cousin to a Slender Man has all the little kids terrified. They say that Hachishakusama means something similar to the 8 feet tall lady. Hachi means 8. Shaku refers to an ancient Japanese measurement unit, approximately 2.5 or 3 meters. And sama means miss or lady, which is usually used as a sign of respect towards people who are superior to you in some way. The legend says that Hachishakusama was imprisoned years ago in 4 small Jitsu statues. However, one of the statues broke, and that gave her the opportunity to escape from her prison. Here, we bring you the story of a young boy who managed to survive the spirit when he was just 8 years old. Every summer, my parents would bring me to my grandparents' house in a small rural town in Japan. I would feel very free in there. A hot afternoon, while I was resting on the grass of the yard, I heard a strange sound. I didn't know where it was coming from, but because I'm curious by nature, I decided to look around. It sounded like a deep voice, and it was saying something like, "Papa, Papa," as if someone was talking to himself or herself. I noticed that over the hedge there was a woman's head. The sound was coming from there, and the head was moving. That was a very weird sight, because what I was seeing could not have been a person. How could someone be so tall? I took a closer look, and I saw her. I saw an extremely tall woman between the branches, and her arms and legs seemed infinite. She had long black hair, and you could barely see her face. She had a long black dress that matched her head. I wanted to get closer, but the woman got away, taking her weird sounds with her. When I got back home, I found my grandparents drinking tea in the kitchen, and I told them what had happened. They didn't pay much attention to what I was saying. But when I mentioned the height of that woman and the sound she was making, both of my grandparents turned pale. My grandma stopped herself from screaming. My grandpa, with a very serious look, took me by the arm and made me repeat all the details of where I was and when it happened. Grandpa ran out of the kitchen and grabbed the phone in the hallway to call someone. I stayed in the kitchen with my grandma. I was very scared, and she was trembling in fear. My grandpa told us he had to go out for a moment and asked my grandma not to take her eyes off of me. Crying, I asked grandma what was going on. With sadness, she said, "Hachishakusama has put her eyes on you." That spirit is a being that searches for children in order to take advantage of them because they are easier to deceive. Thus, when a child is of the liking of Hachishakusama, that child will be doomed. The spirit will kidnap the kid, and he or she will disappear forever. My grandpa, determined to defend me, went out to search for a witch capable of confronting Hachishakusama. The witch ordered me to stay in my room, locked me up in there, and told me that I couldn't go out under any circumstance before 7 a.m. Before leaving me alone, she placed 4 bowls of salt in the 4 corners of my room, and also placed an image of Buddha that I should pray to whenever I felt fear. She gave me a piece of parchment and told me to keep it in my hand at all times. I spent the night completely alone, hearing strange sounds outside the window, including the familiar sound which announced the arrival of Hachishakusama. I suddenly heard the voice of my grandpa asking me how I was feeling. He told me that if I was afraid, all I had to do was open the door. And I felt so much fear that I almost opened it. But fortunately, I quickly remembered what the witch told me, and trembling in fear, I knelt before the Buddha and prayed repeatedly, terrified and crying. The salt in the bowls was turning dark. That night felt never-ending, and the tapping on the window was not stopping. When sunrise finally came, the salt was completely black. I looked at the clock and saw that I could now get out of my room. My grandparents cried of happiness when they saw me safe and sound. My grandpa, without delay, took all of us out of the house and got me in a van in the middle of 8 men from the town the witch was driving. Sitting among those men, all of them relatives of the witch, they told me that although I was in big trouble, all I had to do was keep my head down and my eyes closed, as only I could see Hachishakusama. However, when they tell you to close your eyes, that only entices you to open them more, doesn't it? And I did. I kept my head down, but I saw her outside the window, floating by the side of the van with a white dress. She put her face close to the window. I screamed and closed my eyes as strongly as I could while squeezing the parchment I was given the previous night. The others couldn't see her, nor hear the chilling sound she was making, but they could hear when she was tapping the body and windows of the van. Kei-san, the witch, started to pray so loudly that her prayer turned into screaming. After praying screaming for a while, the sounds and the tapping ceased. And this is the story of how I survived. I could never go back to my grandparents' house, as I ran the risk of the spirit kidnapping me and finishing what she set out to do. We don't know what it is that she does to her victims, but some say that she feeds off the young essence of her praise.
Today, we're going to be mystical and summoners, and we're going to talk about the Hitori Kakurenbo, or game of hide and seek alone. A rite with Japanese origin that serves to contact those from beyond. If you're one of those who think that spirits haunt us looking for a body to possess, this is your challenge. You will be able to summon a spirit and offer it a doll in which to reside. Surely you're thinking that playing hide and seek at home alone is a bit silly, but playing Hitori Kakurenbo doesn't seem boring. To perform this invocation, we will need a doll, rice, a needle, red thread, a sharp object, a cup with salt, and a place to hide. Once all the materials were gathered, we would proceed to start the ritual. The first thing we have to do to perform this spooky act is to choose a stuffed animal or doll. We must make sure that it has limbs. It is essential to perform the ritual well, and important, it must have a name. We could do it with the Teke Teke stuffed animals. Which one do you prefer? Well, better not, we have few units. Once the stuffed animal has been chosen, it is advisable to open it with a knife, although we assume that scissors are also useful. You have to remove the stuffing and proceed to fill the entire stuffed animal with rice. We are sure that thousands of stuffed animals have lost their lives because of this ritual. So sad. Well, let's continue. Until here, it was easy, right? Now it's an unpleasant part because we have to cut our fingernails and toenails and introduce them into the mix. There are versions in which they recommend pouring some blood, but with the nails, it is enough. It is time to sew the doll with a red thread. When we finish, we would have to tie the doll with the rest of the thread. Now we have to fill a bathtub with water and pour in salt. We must turn off all the lights in the house, although an ambient candle light is always good for invocations. We wait for 3 in the morning, which, as you all know, is a time when Satan was born, the witching hour, the time when our body is in a deep sleep phase, and is more sensitive to certain experiences. Well, at that time, we repeat the doll's name 3 times, and then we say, "It's my turn," and we put the doll in the bathtub with water. We go to hide and count to 10 and go back to the bathtub with the doll. We grab the doll from the bathtub and say, "I found you," and its name. Now comes the creepiest part of the game, because we have to pierce the doll with an object that can pierce it, like a knife, scissors, a pencil, a pen. And quickly, it's time to hide, and you have to do it very well, because the nails inside the doll create a link with you. If the doll finds you and catches you, it will stab you with the same object you stabbed him with. In case any intrepid dares to play, we show you how to close the ritual. We have to pour half a cup of salt water in the mouth, but not drink it. Just keep it there. We look for the doll that is looking for us, and when we find it, we spit out the salt water and say, "I win," 3 times. It is said that if you win twice in a row, the doll will accept that we are the winners and will answer everything we ask. Would you dare to play Hitori Kakurenbo? Do you dare to play hide and seek with the spirits? Remember that if you do, it is better to puncture it with thumbtack. Gozu, translated as cowhead, is a Japanese urban legend of a terrifying story about an animal with the body of a man and the head of a cow, which, they say, the simple fact of telling it can lead to a chain of supernatural and terrifying events. The first indications of the legend date back to the 17th century, with rumors that speak of a village in which the story of Gozu was told. It is said that the entire town was traumatized and terrified. They isolated themselves from the whole world so that many of its inhabitants ended up dying of starvation or they killed themselves, for fear that when they left the house, the cowhead went for them.
This terrible story of the town reached the ears of the central government, which, fearing that history would repeat itself, decided to eliminate all existing written documents about the terrifying creature, in addition to prohibiting the very mention of Gozu under penalty of death. Although such a ban couldn't prevent the story from being scattered in pieces throughout Japan, waiting for the bravest to discover it. This is the reason why no one knows the full story. Although it is said that just by telling a little bit of the legend of Gozu, many can suffer serious trauma and run a huge risk of death. There is a rumor not too far away of a school teacher who, tired of his students misbehaving on field trips, came up with a foolproof idea to keep his students calm. He began to tell all horror and ghost stories to the boys, who curiously had developed an addiction to the teacher's morbid and bizarre tales. On one of the trips, the professor promised them that he was going to tell a forbidden story, which was the most mysterious and gloomy he had ever told them, but that he would only tell it to them if absolutely all of them behaved well on the trip. And so they did. Not a single child raised his voice, fought, or did anything wrong on the excursion. Everyone wanted to know what that terrifying story would be. When they were on their way back, the teacher got up from his seat and warned everyone to keep quiet, because he was going to tell them the story of the cow head. It is not known how the teacher had obtained one of the written pieces of the legend. But as he began to narrate, many of the students began to scream and cover their ears. The children shouted, "Stop! Don't tell us!" But as if he didn't hear or see them, the man continued with his story. It is said that his eyes turned white and his voice became much deeper, as if he was possessed by Gozu himself, eager to tell his story. When the teacher finally regained consciousness, everything around him was a horrible image. The bus had left the road, many children were full of blood and wounds from the blow, although they didn't cry. Their faces only showed horror and pain, but not a single cry could be heard. The driver, who had suffered multiple injuries from the windshield glass, was motionless in his seat, holding the steering wheel tightly, sweating and trembling, while his face was so pale that it seemed as if he were already dead. We don't know what happened next, but the teacher never mentioned Gozu again or told any horror stories. And neither he nor any of his students ever talked about what happened. They were too scared. The legend of Gozu is very old. It became more popular when the Japanese movie Gozu, The Path of Madness from 2003 was released. The character also appears in the anime Danganronpa the Animation, released in 2013. We haven't dared to investigate more about the history of Gozu, but if you like this video, as we are intrepid researchers, we will get to work in search of the legend of the cow-headed monster to be able to tell it to you. Do you want us to do it?
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you in the next episode!